Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on AI and developer productivity. This is going to be a guide for IT leaders on adopting generative AI assistance in software development. I could not be more excited to be leading this conversation alongside our esteemed guests today. For everyone, I am Stephanie Wong, lead product manager for Gemini for Google Cloud. And today I am joined by some of our most illustrious leaders in the AI space at Google. And so I'm going to go ahead and let them all introduce themselves. Here today, we do have Paige. So I will start with you.
Excellent. It's great to be here. My name is Paige Bailey. I'm the product lead for generative AI as applied to code and software development at Alphabet. I'm also one of the PMs working on Gemini.
Awesome. And today we also have Ravi.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. My name is Ravi, and I lead our generative AI Black Belt team. And my role at Google, I work with our strategic customers and help them assist along their generative AI journey.
Thank you. And Balaji.
Thank you for having me. Balaji Rajam. I'm part of the Global Solutions Engineering team at Google Cloud. Our focus is how do we help customers improve their software delivery and development processes using generative AI?
Amazing. I am super excited to get into the meat of the conversation. Well, let's kick it off right away and talk about the first topic here, which is how generative AI innovations impact software development and delivery. And the first question we have here is how have recent generative AI innovations transformed traditional software development practices? Let's go ahead and start with Paige.
Awesome. I love this question. And I think it's been really transformative across the entire software development lifecycle. We speak a lot in terms of inner loop software development and outer loop software development. And inner loop is really all around you're in the process of writing code. You might be in an IDE like VS Code. You're really focused on code generation, kind of the assistive features that you might see in Gemini Code Assist. But really, the next phase of this entire transformation is expanding after the software has been deployed or as you're going through the code review process. So at Google, we do everything from kind of the usual suspects like code completion, code generation, but also code explanation, ML assisted edits as part of the code review process. So after you submit your change and a reviewer has a comment that they would like for you to fix, you can just automatically use machine learning to resolve their comment and generate some code that will do what they had asked you to do and make that change. We also apply machine learning to software performance. So being able to take code, make it hyper optimized, which really helps with fleet optimization and also compute and storage optimization. We also apply AI to security to make sure that as you're generating code, it's conforming with best practices. It doesn't have any OWASP top 10 security vulnerabilities. And so really, it's not just the process of building software, it's also the process of maintaining it, making it more performant and efficient, and then also making sure that all of the kind of work that happens outside of an IDE is as streamlined as possible. So would love to talk about any and everything related to those things.
I'd love to get Ravi's your thoughts as well about and other areas that you see AI impacting the software development.
I think if you look at it from the prism of a software developer, one could be from can I stay where I am, maybe at a lower cost point? So look at it from a productivity perspective, right? Or you could focus on more innovation and delivery excellence. So can I start bringing more disruptive technologies? What are these generative AI or in general, how does that impact the way I build software, right? Especially as companies and enterprises start to look at how do I reimagine my customer experience? How do I go after new business models? I think this is fascinating to see how developers are, a key cog in this. So yeah, it's really interesting what's happening.
Definitely, I agree. And how about you, Balaji?
I'll come at it from a slightly different angle on this because during a lot of customer meetings, you speak to customers which span the spectrum, right? It's awesome to have Paige here because she brings the inside view from what Google's perspective is on this particular topic. When you talk to customers, you get a mix of hope and anxiety. If you want to phrase it that way, one is the hope that hey, this is actually going to help us accelerate how we build and deploy software and so on. There's also this anxiety that because there are people in the room who are worried that, hey, is this actually going to impact my job? The first thing which I tell them is that's not something which you need to worry about, right? The thing which I focus on is the doing during your software development processes, you have work and you have toil, to use our SRE terms. So the goal of a lot of the AI assistants which we see, whether it is in the inner loop or outer loop, as Paige said, is to actually take away a lot of the toil which is involved in software development, and so that it frees up your time to focus on value which delivers work value to the enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you're mentioning, it's crucial to emphasize managing the risk of um, over reliance on AI and making sure that developers are really a part of maintaining clear ownership and understanding of the systems themselves. And I loved what you all said. I think one area in particular that excites me is also the idea that developers can use AI to automate parts of, like what you were talking about, Paige, unit tests, or even building agents that could trigger workflows more easily, and then connect it to the outer loop process once that code is deployed as well. I want to talk a little bit about more what ways generative AI is improving the quality of software development and delivery itself. So maybe we can start with Ravi this time.
Yeah. So as the panel mentioned, so customers have very complicated, especially if you look at an enterprise customer, they have traditional ways of building software code bases, and they are trying to make that move towards more cloud native models, right? So there is that transformation that is happening. And if you look at the developer and you look at the life cycle, so what are some of the repeated mundane tasks that we should, even from a quality perspective, that we could drive much higher? What are the things that we could have AI assist you as part of that? And then where are the ones that, as Balaji mentioned, you know that's maybe from a cost perspective, right? And then quality perspective, how do we drive that? From a process perspective, I think there is still a lot of evolving standards. There's still a lot of, as you bring diverse teams together, I think people are still trying to figure out what would be the right sort of standard to adopt. There are some multiple thoughts on that perspective, but from a software perspective itself, like how you build that software, I think there is a lot of excitement around how you can start building code that is more deterministic, that is more, I would say, repeatable, right? And then start building on top of that.
And how about you, Balaji?
Um, I, One of the things which I always like to bring to customers is how things have changed in the last 3 to 4 years. Yes, we started using Gen AI tools in the last year, but preceding that, there has been the sea of change on how enterprises operate, right? Because every enterprise has now people who are spread all across the nation or the globe working on key software projects. So, and not enough people come to the office, so those interactions are getting less. And the probably hundreds of people who got onboarded into different organizations during the pandemic, right? Where they didn't have the hand holding or the assistance or the mentorship, which is typically associated when you actually join an organization. One of the key ways I see a lot of that help, the AI tools which are helping there, is when you join a new organization, you're trying to understand existing code bases. Very rarely are you writing code from scratch. So being able to look at 1,000 line file of code and trying to understand that has made so much simpler with a right click of a button, right? Being able, we are, so as part of our solutions which we build, we are building capabilities where a developer can chat with a piece of code, right? You have a giant legacy code base, being able to ask questions like, hey, what does this particular function do? Or how does this method operate? And so on. So those kind of things are actually getting a lot simplified with the use of AI tools. Yes, there are all the core capabilities which Paige mentioned, which are very critical in accelerating software development. But I see this is actually helping more of a build a human, not quite a human to human connection, but kind of supplement that.
Yeah, and I love all the angles that each of you bring to this conversation. Paige, what are you seeing within and outside of Google in this space and how it's improving productivity?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The one thing that I find to be particularly compelling about Gemini's new 1 million token context window is that, in addition to being able to pull in an entire legacy code base, like what was mentioned before, you can also incorporate in your company's compliance standards. You can incorporate any kind of manuals or best practices that an organization might have, and then use that to help guide the code that gets created. I think it's really powerful to be able to, not only help new engineers get onboarded more quickly, but also to get them into a place where they can start making changes across an entire code base much more effectively and in a way that's secure, compliant, and aligned with the corporation's standards. This is something we care about a lot internally at Alphabet. The quality of code kind of governs the quality of the software that we release out into the world. And so we're certainly thinking about ways to build trust in the generated code and ways to help people feel more familiarized with what's actually happening in generated code.
Absolutely. And I feel like I'm hearing a few themes here, which is reduced errors and improved quality. There's faster experimentation and prototyping and streamlined workflows and sort of changing the relationship that developers have with their code. There is a broader scheme around it with Agile and DevOps. So I'm curious your thoughts on how generative AI aligns with Agile and DevOps methodologies. Are there any best practices for synergies between these three spaces? Right now we can start with Apology.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's a very critical question, which we discuss quite often with customers, right? I almost look at it in reverse. Essentially, to enable your organization to use AI tools and those kind of things effectively, you have to have an agile and DevOps methodology in your organization. Because let's look at code generation, for instance. When you have your developers using these AI tools to generate your code, you need to have the right processes and automation in place so that your code is validated before it actually gets deployed, whatever environment you're choosing to, right? So that automation of test cases, making sure you have trunk-based development, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and so on, that becomes vital to being successful in using those AI tools. That's kind of the perspective which I take with a lot of the customers whom I speak to.
Yeah, thank you. And Paige?
Yeah. One of the most interesting use cases that I've seen for AI as applied to software development is really this entire concept of being able to go from a bug or kind of in the agile methodologies, more of a story, to a fix, or being able to generate the skeleton of code that could be used to address that feature request or that bug that was added for a developer team's backlog. And I think that these two approaches are very complementary, and I think also the agile methodologies can really kind of augment and streamline some of these software engineering workflows with AI, because so much is documented in those processes, and so much kind of follows a formula, a path, which can be not only excellent training data for the models themselves, but can also make sure that there's the right context and the right understanding for a model and a developer, to kind of progress along with work and make sure that the system is getting the right attention that it needs. So lots of ways that the two methodologies can live together, and be complementary as opposed to orthogonal.
Right. And how about you? Anything to add there, Ravi?
Yeah, I agree with both Balaji and what Pate said. Just one thing, if you look at it from a customer perspective and how they have set up their current processes, with generative AI, it's almost you need to have, a continuous delivery, continuous kind of pipeline if you want to deliver software faster, better, more reliable, etc. Yeah. So, and then that's where most customers are trying to figure out, okay, how do I, start with this generative AI journey, and then how do I set my teams up for success as we deliver these things to the customer? And the model quality, new models come up, the quality keeps increasing, but still you do not want to wait, because you want to get in. Customers are getting in now. The use cases are very, very real. But then how do you keep that whole life cycle, so where you can get back, start with a new version, but more continuous? Yeah, so I think that it's almost needed is my point, with generative AI. And this is what just makes it exciting for a lot of the developers, as well as sort of the operators in this case.
Thank you, Ravi. I definitely agree with that as well. And I do want to move into the second topic here, which is strategies and tips on integrating AI assistance into the software development workflow. So the question here is, for organizations just beginning to integrate generative AI into their development workflow, where is the most effective starting point? I think this is a big question for a lot of organizations, especially the most complex. So, Ravi, why don't we start with you?
I think you even want to go a step back, Stephanie, because customers are looking at what are we, right? I mean, they're kind of looking to answer that question. Am I a bank, or am I a software company that does banking services? Am I a retailer, or am I a software company that provides retail service? I mean, it looks like a stupid question, but it is not, because what is your DNA, right? I mean, is it more, I'm going to take some off the shelf products and then do a little bit of customization, or do I need to build this credible software DNA within my organization? And this is what most C-level folks are thinking, saying, okay, what do I do to set my team up for success, right? I think that's number one. And then if you look at, as you start integrating customers, there are different, again, schools of thought here. They have an innovation office, and they say, okay, they want to do some incubation of maybe one or two products, and say, okay, let's go figure out how to get this to market, get some feedback, right? That's one way to do this. Generative AI is much more horizontal, in the sense, it's foundational in a lot of different things. So you could embed AI into a lot of different ways: how you do software, how you meet your customers, how you service them. So it's a question of risk appetite at that point, saying, like, how fast do you want to go? But then I don't want to disrupt too much of my current business as well, right? So I think that is where a lot of customers are right now.
Yeah. Anything to add on to that, Balaji?
Yeah. So one of the things which when we start discussions about AI tools and software development, the immediate pivot is to something like Gemini Code Assist, right? Which is our AI assistant for helping with code generation and code completion. One of the things which I ask customers about is, do you know where you stand as a software delivery organization? Because applying code assist tools are great, which helps your developers produce more code, but are your processes and your systems downstream equipped to handle that, right? So one of the things which I emphasize more on is, like, let's actually try to understand where your challenges lie as an organization, which starts with our methodology, which is DORA, which stands for DevOps Research and Assessment. And what we do is we do an assessment with customers, which helps analyze their software development maturity across around 38 different parameters. So that includes very technical areas like continuous integration, trunk-based development, and so on, and more like, hey, what's your culture like, and those kind of things as well. So once we identify that, we can look at what are the areas of improvement in the customer, and then see if does it make sense to apply Gen AI to that. As an example, let's say if code review is a huge sticking point for them. They build applications using Go. They only have 2 or 3 people who can review code that is actually backing up the deployment to production. So if you could use Gen AI tools to actually improve code review in that step, so now you have limited the burden on these 3 or 4 people. So that actually accelerates your software development processes. So this actually ties into how do you measure some of the productivity gains you gain from using AI as well, because this actually speaks to the overall software delivery. It's not just enough that I generate 100 more lines of code every day because of AI. It needs to actually translate to the end business goals, which is tied to being able to deploy and operate off applications in a very sustainable manner.
Right. And Paige, you've been working internally with development teams as well. Have you seen some things that have worked, or externally with your work here too?
Yeah. I love the comments around on Balaji and Ravi's comments about how do we sort of make sure that each company is being successful at what their unique mission and value add are. Because the reality is, if you are a company that perhaps your core business is something around shipping or transportation or supply chain or oil and gas or whatever it might be, um, that's your business objective. And software might be a means to an end to
Right.
get you towards your business objectives. In which case, data is really, really important. So being able to have telemetry to track, if your developers are authoring code, how often are you experiencing rollbacks? What is the timeline from having a story to actually getting a feature implemented? To Balaji's point, how long does your code review cycle take? Is it usually going through significant amounts of code review, or is it, kind of best effort, and then code gets to production perhaps a little bit more quickly than it should? All of these things are really important to analyze and to instrument. And as an example, internally within Alphabet, we've published quite a bit of this work as well. We instrument every single part of the software development lifecycle. So every step of the way from, a Googler filing a bug towards going to look at documentation to try to make sense of it, to looking at other kind of pull requests or CLs, we call them internally, that feel similar or might look similar to the bug that they're trying to solve. Like all sorts of things to really get a handle on how long is each stage of this life cycle taking, and where are the optimal places for us to think about applying AI to this full process. So I think that oftentimes companies, they might hear that AI is transformative, and they start, feeling like this urgency and needing to apply it everywhere across their business. But the reality is that, your value add is so unique, and your internal processes are so unique, that you really need to figure out where is the most optimal place to start applying these technologies yourself. And the GCP teams are always happy to help. There are also great learning resources online to begin to understand this too. But I think that's the most important piece is AI isn't just one hammer that works for everyone. There's really a bit of tailoring that still needs to happen to make things work well for any given company.
Right. And as most things go with technology, there is no one size fits all. So it's very much the case here too. But thank you for providing those frameworks on how to approach it. I'm curious how you think IT leaders would be able to evaluate and select the right generative AI assistant for their specific development needs. Like, how do we hone in on the right tool in this way? Paige, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Some things that might sound boring, but definitely must be considered are things around compliance, security, making sure that if you are using a tool, that it's actually sort of okayed by your IT organization. So, as an example, there are certain tools on the market that aren't SOC 2 compliant, or that are only approved to be used with code that's stored in the United States as opposed to in other locations. And that's something that as a business, might work well for some companies, but not for others. I think also you need to look at where your developers are spending the most time. So as an example, if your developers are working within the context of VS Code, or they're working within GCP, there are a subset of tools that work with those platforms. Whereas if they're perhaps using some of the JetBrains tools or other solutions, then maybe they would need to opt for other extensions or other tools. One of the nice things about Gemini Code Assist, and then all of the great APIs that are being made available through the Vertex AI platform, is that if you want to build your own extension for your own proprietary IDE, you would be able to go about doing that for code completion, code generation, code Q&A, all of that goodness, without having to migrate all of your developers onto a new IDE, regardless. But there are certainly a lot of considerations at play, and I would love to hear Balaji and Ravi's experience as well.
Yeah. We'll do that right now. How about you, Balaji? Anything to add there?
Yeah, this is actually a question I think which people are still figuring out their answers to. So during the course of my work, working with a lot of customers who are starting to use Gemini Code Assist, right? And they ask us, hey, how do we measure the success of this thing? Because they want to get our perspective on it. So the first thing which we talk to them about is like, yes, this is ultimately a tool. What are the OKRs you are tying to from your organization perspective, which you're trying to use this tool to get to, right? So that is one part of it. And in the evaluation process, we said that rather I've seen very simplistic approaches to do this. People take 10 prompts, they will run it in one assistant, another run the same 10 prompts in one assistant. I'm like, that is not the best way to evaluate your AI assistant, which is becoming the core of your software development processes. So the way I have talked to customers about is let's actually look at your daily workflow. Maybe if you have your backlog, let's take some PRs of complex, say medium complexity, say two or three of medium complexity, some of like lesser complexity, and have your development team work through those PRs using our tools, right? And let's see at the end of it, let's evaluate based on the criteria which we define on what kind of gains they achieved. I feel like that is a better reflection of how your future will be rather than running 10 prompts at a time to each tool.
Strong endorse. Like it still shocks me how many organizations do not have their own internal set of evals for these use cases. And it's really important not just to rely on the external evals because of data set contamination, because perhaps those evals aren't aligned with what your company really finds important about its software development lifecycle. Love the nudge to create evals and to really be principled about them.
And that's a great point, because that's sort of related to what I was trying to go. Most customers, as they are, large customers, if you look at them, they have built a lot of complex systems, right? And the more legacy systems there are, the fewer people who have competency on this, right? So it's even hard. I mean, telling them to create evals is one thing, but them having that competence to go create, that is a slightly different problem, right? So back to the question, Stephanie, you asked. The way I look at it is these customers are looking for a system that can help them first off make understand what their code base is doing, and because they have people who wrote the code not well documented, they have gone, they're trying to bring someone else, or they have a partner running that code. So trying to get a sense of what is the quality, what is my standard for how I build software, and then the evals, as both Paige and Balaji mentioned, I think that's key. And also the ability to sort of extend and go after, because they also want to create, as they are in their journey to becoming more of a software company, they want to kind of start building their own sort of, hey, here is how I build software, right? Not someone telling me based on some billion lines of code that it was trained on, but how do I build software? They want to build their own sort of unique footprint on how they build software. So um, I think something like a Gemini code assist is, I've heard a lot of customers tell us that, hey, listen, how fast can you go? Like, how many more IDs can you support? How many more languages can you support? So it's really exciting from that perspective, right? As this evolves.
Yeah, definitely. 100% agree with that. I have one other question in this section before we're running on low on time, so I want to move on to the last one. But you touched on evals being specifically important for teams, but are there any other risks associated with using generative AI in software development, and how can they be mitigated? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Balaji, if we can start with you.
Sure. I think one of the concerns I think that is across the whole LLM universe and using tools which are based on LLMs, which is coming up is around copyright, and are we infringing on, say, if it's specific to code, is some of the code being generated coming from something else? So that's actually one of the reasons Gemini Code Assist has this feature called recitation checks, right? Where when a piece of code is suggested to a developer, and if that code has, say, it may be in, say, in a GPL, but depending on how you use the code within your application could determine whether it is legal to use it or not. So we do show the warnings there so that developers can be conscious of it. We have customers who are asking us, can we even completely block that thing? That is something which we are looking into in a future capability of Gemini Code Assist. So those kind of things actually become very critical. That is at the base level, but ultimately the the question also comes to us, right? As Google, hey, are you using my code and my prompts in to train your models? The categorical answer to that is no, we don't use it. Base models are frozen, and we do not actually even log the prompts or the responses at this point. So that's, I think those are kind of two sides of the risk which a lot of the customers are concerned about.
Yes. How about you, Paige?
Yeah, definitely plus one to that. I think being cognizant of what data from your organization is being used to train models and how each tool or technology might approach that question is really important. I know from the customers that I've talked to about Gemini Code Assist, one of the things that they're most excited about is that there aren't tracking inputs and outputs, and that their data stays safe and not kind of incorporated into a larger base model. I think also internally there's there's this huge push to make sure that any code that is generated is actually good code.
Hmm.
So again, kind of performant, compliant, aligned with company standards. And there are post-processing checks that go into the code outputs to make sure that that's the case. So both to do kind of these more static analysis checks to make sure that the code would actually compile, it would actually run, it's syntactically correct, as well as following any internal brand guidelines or standards that might be unique to Alphabet. I think the one of the hardest things for generative AI for me personally is building trust with the system, and being able to say, okay, well, if the code is being generated, why did it opt for this library as opposed to this other one? And why did it adopt these stylistic conventions versus another? As much information as I can get, as much rationale behind those decisions, the more comfortable I feel about accepting the code as a developer.
Right. And you, Ravi?
Yeah, I just want to add one point. I agree with both what Balaji and Paige said. So code autocomplete rates are getting better, right? So as the LLMs evolve, as more code is used to kind of train the model, I think it's getting better and better. But what is top of mind for a lot of the CIOs is, is there going to be any risk of IP leaks going both ways, right? So are we going to use code that is not something that we are licensed for? Maybe there is a library that it got picked up. That human in the loop is still a pretty important aspect of your whole software sort of development process. Yeah, sometimes it's generated by AI, it's good. I think we'll get there eventually, but I don't think it is true today, especially for enterprise customers.
Yeah, and I think there is a collaborative model with customers to ensure that they understand their code base the best, they know the quality bar, and they want to make sure that whatever system they build on top of Gemini, for example, is going to maintain the standards and the safety that they want to abide by. So I want to dive into the last section here, how to prepare your development teams during the transition to the AI era. So the first question here, and we might not get to more, but what are some new skills that are essential for software developers in the AI era, and how can organizations facilitate this training for their teams? So, why don't we go ahead and start with Balaji?
That There's a question which I've been pondering as well. How does this change how you bring in your software training and things like that into the organization? The first thing which I would say is there's no substitute. AI, Gen AI, and the tools are not a substitute for good software engineering practices. Those practices and your coding skills still need to hold up to the mark. You need to understand what does a good application and a code look like. So that still is very relevant. AI does not take that away. I think understanding the AI tools impact and where exactly to use them, whether it is code generation, are you using it for generating unit test, and understanding what are its limitations. I think that is a critical part of starting to use these capabilities, because as Ravi mentioned, right, there are certain things which your AI tools will generate which are not in accordance with maybe your organization standard or what you're intending to do. So that cognizance, that you know that, hey, I have to do that extra check. I cannot just do accept and then submit my code. That is, I think, probably one of the key understanding, because uh, all of us like to take shortcuts, and AI becomes a shortcut for coding. And you should not strictly see it that way. Yes, it does generate the code for you, but the due diligence on making sure the code is performing the right functions in the right manner is still up to you.
Yeah, 100% there. And what about you, Paige? Do you have thoughts here?
Yeah, one thing that I've found generative AI has helped me with as a developer is that it helps me frame my ideas more clearly, and that as a person who is, prompting a generative model to accomplish a task, you really have to treat it exactly the same way as you would as, perhaps a contractor who's working, somewhere else, that you have to send very, very detailed and specific requirements to, because that contractor has zero context for the use case that you're trying to accomplish. And so I really feel like the kind of skill sets that you can empower your developers with, of being able to clearly articulate what they're trying to build, being able to kind of communicate those requirements in a very detailed and specific way, and also being able to kind of explore and iterate and try new things if their first output isn't quite what they were expecting. Those skill sets will continue to be invaluable. And not just with generative models, but also with the other humans that we work with every day, right? Like being able to communicate, to sort of explain the purpose of a system is always going to be important.
Absolutely. And Robbie, how about your experience here?
I think maybe hopefully not too controversial, but in some cases, if you have a long experience building software, you almost have to unlearn how you did software development earlier and then start to learn how to build it in this generative AI transformative world, right? And if you I'm working with the bank, they are looking to leverage software and AI to automate, and how do I do next gen IT operations, right? I mean, traditionally they would have had a bunch of monitoring tools, they would have had some rule based systems, and they would have kind of put together. But now, this is a new role, right? This is a new sort of use case for someone to go build. How do I predict a production outage? How do I mean, it comes naturally for folks inside Google, because we kind of do that. But this is the democratization that is happening for a lot of these companies. Yeah. So from a skill set perspective, I think Paige mentioned this, right? Like, how do I build software? Learn from it, experiment, iterate. This whole sort of software lifecycle process. But the way it is getting expanded into these use cases that we traditionally would have not thought of, I think is the most exciting thing, right? And that's causing a lot more velocity to happen.
Thank you so much for providing your thoughts on that final question. I wish we had more time because we have so many questions that we didn't even get to. So hopefully this will be the first of many AI topics in the future. But thank you, Paige, Ravi, Balaji, for bringing your thoughts and providing your strategies and tips for organizations of all kinds with unique perspectives based on your experience here at Google so far. Thank you to everybody else for joining our session today. I do want to leave you off with a couple of resources here. Firstly, you can read our guide on generative AI's impact on developer productivity. And secondly, you can sign up for our pilot program for Gemini Code Assist and get started on your generative AI journey. So, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.